The footage drops without warning, and within minutes, the internet is already on fire. Clips start circulating.
I forgive him.
You murdered my husband. I have to tell my daughter every day and explain to her why daddy's not coming home.
Captions grow more dramatic by the second, and suddenly everyone is asking the same question in hushed tones. What are we really looking at here? Fans are shocked, not because anyone is claiming facts, but because the timing, the optics, and the unanswered questions feel too heavy to ignore. This isn't a confirmation of anything, it's a moment. A moment that has people pausing, replaying, zooming in, and whispering to each other in comment sections across every platform. At the center of it all is a woman who has lived the last chapter of her life under an unforgiving spotlight, and a name that refuses to stop resurfacing, no matter how many official explanations have already been given. New footage, old memories, and online speculation have collided into one volatile mix, and now fans are divided. Some say it's nothing, others say it's everything, and in between those two extremes is where the drama really lives. What makes this footage so unsettling isn't what it proves, but what it suggests. People aren't saying this is the truth, they're saying the questions won't go away. Why now? Why does this clip look the way it does? Why does it surface at the exact moment legal pressure seems to be building again? Emotions ran high almost instantly, with supporters rushing to defend and critics demanding clarity, all while reminding each other that social media turns into a courtroom of opinions. Timelines fill with slowed-down clips, side-by-side comparisons, and long threads breaking down every second as if meaning might be hidden.
Egyptian
Do
plate.
you believe that Tyler Robinson murdered your husband?
Yes, I do. Again, everyone always has to think there's more to the story. Well, sometimes...
Between frames. Some fans say they feel manipulated, others say they feel gaslit, and some admit, quietly, that even if none of it is proven, it still doesn't sit right. The family at the center of this storm has been here before, but this time feels different. The questions feel sharper, the silence feels louder, and the reactions feel more personal. No one is claiming answers yet, but one thing is clear. This footage has reopened a conversation many thought was already closed, and once the internet starts asking questions like these, it rarely stops without a fight. The conversation around the footage didn't explode all at once. It crept in quietly, the way uncomfortable questions usually do. First, it was a few comments under reposted clips, then reaction videos, then long threads where people spoke carefully, almost nervously, as if they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Nobody was declaring facts, nobody was claiming certainty, but the mood was unmistakable. Fans were shocked, not by proof, but by patterns, by timing, by how what people kept coming back to was how often this story seemed to shift directions. One day the narrative felt settled, calm, almost closed. The next day, a new clip surfaced and reopened wounds that never fully healed. Viewers began replaying past interviews, past statements, past emotional moments, lining them up against what they were seeing now. Emotions ran high as supporters argued that grief can look messy.
Who's driver? You the driver?
Yeah.
Can you tell me just really quick what happened?
I was coming this way and we just passing through and he pulled out from here, or no, from there, I think.
Do you remember which lane you were in?
I was in one of those two lanes going this way. I think in the right, in the rightmost lane.
While critics insisted that inconsistency deserved scrutiny, neither side was willing to back down. In comment sections, you could almost hear the arguments playing out. Some fans wrote that they felt empathy above all else, reminding everyone that public grief is not linear and doesn't follow rules. Others fired back, saying empathy doesn't mean silence, especially when public actions invite public discussion. The family was left divided in the eyes of the internet, not because of something new being proven, but because old moments were being reinterpreted through a new lens. What really fueled the fire was the emotional contrast people couldn't stop pointing out. Clips of forgiveness were being replayed alongside clips of anger, legal pressure, and firm statements that felt worlds apart in tone. Fans asked each other how both realities could exist at the same time. Some argued that people are allowed to change their minds as emotions evolve. Others questioned whether those changes were organic or strategic. Again, nothing was being declared as truth. It was all commentary, all observation, but the discomfort was real. Reactions from friends and extended circles only added layers to the confusion. Some appeared supportive in public, sharing messages of strength and unity. Others stayed noticeably silent, which only made fans speculate more. Silence, in the age of constant posting, is rarely seen as neutral. People read into it, sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. Every absence became a statement, every appearance a potential clue. Online creators jumped in cautiously at first, framing their videos as questions rather than conclusions. They spoke slowly, choosing words that left room for interpretation. Phrases like, "reports are suggesting," and "viewers are noticing," became common. The goal wasn't to accuse, but to acknowledge what was already happening across platforms. Once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. Interview 657-713. Fans began revisiting older moments that once seemed harmless. Smiles in photos, casual interactions, background figures in videos. Nothing was off limits anymore. People admitted they might be reading too much into things, yet continued to do so anyway. That's how powerful unresolved stories can be. They pull you in even when you know you should step back. Through it all, one theme kept repeating itself: trust. Some fans said they felt their trust wobbling, not because of any single clip, but because of the cumulative weight of unanswered questions. Others said trust was being unfairly tested by internet culture that thrives on suspicion. The debate wasn't just about one family or one case anymore. It became about how stories are shaped in real time and how easily perception can shift. By the end of this phase, the audience wasn't asking for a verdict. They were asking for clarity. Not closure, not punishment, just understanding. But clarity is rarely immediate, especially when emotions and public narratives collide. The footage didn't provide answers. It provided momentum. And momentum, once it starts, has a way of carrying stories forward, whether anyone is ready or not. The conversation around the footage did not erupt in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it spread slowly, almost quietly, like a rumor people were unsure they wanted.
Despite the devastating loss of Charlie Kirk, my incredible husband at UVU, Caleb has persisted with the same grit. It has been a long day. Trust me, you're not a grifter, honey.
To repeat out loud. At first, it was just a few reposts, a few comments buried under longer threads, a few creators hesitating before hitting upload. Nobody claimed this footage proved anything. Nobody said it confirmed a theory, but fans were shocked by how quickly it changed the emotional temperature of the entire story. Something about it felt off, not because of what it showed, but because of when it appeared and how familiar the confusion felt. People began revisiting everything they thought they understood. Old interviews resurfaced. Emotional speeches were clipped and replayed next to calmer statements made months earlier. Viewers started asking each other if they remembered certain moments correctly, or if memory itself had been shaped by the narrative that followed. Emotions ran high as empathy clashed with suspicion. One side urged compassion, reminding everyone that grief can twist behavior in unpredictable ways. The other side insisted that public actions naturally invite public questions, especially when timelines start to blur. The comment sections became their own kind of battleground. Fans argued late into the night, typing long paragraphs about intention, trauma, and human contradiction. Some said they felt protective, almost defensive, as if questioning anything at all was an act of cruelty. Others pushed back, saying silence and discomfort are often how hard truths stay buried. The family was left divided in the court of public opinion, not by facts, but by perception. What made the situation feel heavier was the contrast people kept pointing out. Moments of forgiveness were replayed alongside moments of anger and urgency. Calm reflection sat next to urgent demands. Fans asked how both emotional states could exist without explanation. Some answered that emotions evolve, especially after loss. Others suggested that evolution does not always explain sharp turns in public behavior. Nobody claimed certainty, but the discomfort grew louder. Friends and extended circles unintentionally added fuel to the fire. Supportive messages appeared selectively, while others who had once been vocal went quiet. Silence became a language of its own. Fans read meaning in who spoke and who did not, even though no one truly knew what was happening behind closed doors. In a world where every feeling is often shared instantly, absence felt intentional, whether it was or not. Online commentators treaded carefully. Many framed their videos as discussions rather than declarations. Phrases like "reports are circulating" and "viewers are raising questions" dominated the tone. They emphasized that nothing was confirmed, that this was commentary, not conclusion. But once those conversations began, they took on a life of their own. Viewers shared clips with captions that hinted rather than accused, letting implication do the heavy lifting. Soon, nothing from the past felt too small to re-examine. Old photos were scrutinized, background faces were circled, casual moments were slowed down and replayed.
Even those who admitted it might be a stretch kept watching, kept questioning. Unresolved stories have a way of pulling people back in, even when they know speculation can spiral. Trust became the word people kept coming back to. Some fans admitted their trust felt shaken, not by one piece of footage, but by how many unanswered questions seemed to stack up over
time. Others argued that trust was being unfairly tested by an internet culture addicted to doubt. The debate grew bigger than the individuals involved. It became about how narratives are built, challenged, and reshaped in real time. By the time this wave of discussion settled into a steady hum, the audience was not demanding a verdict. They were asking for clarity. Not closure, not blame, just something that made the story feel grounded again. The footage itself did not offer answers. It offered momentum. And once momentum takes hold, it rarely pauses to ask whether everyone is ready for what comes next. As the momentum carried forward, the tone of the discussion began to shift. What started as confusion slowly hardened into something closer to frustration. Fans weren't just reacting anymore. They were connecting dots, real or imagined, and sharing those connections with conviction. Reactions grew louder, more emotional, and more polarized. People stopped asking quiet questions and started challenging each other openly. Emotions ran high as timelines were dissected, screenshots were compared, and memories were debated like an informal trial that never seemed to adjourn. One of the biggest talking points became the idea of control. Viewers noticed how often the public narrative seemed to move abruptly from one emotional extreme to another. Forgiveness followed by urgency, softness followed by pressure. Some fans said this felt human, like a grieving person trying to survive chaos. Others argued it felt curated, as if the story itself was being guided rather than naturally unfolding. No one claimed proof, but many claimed intuition, and intuition can be powerful when shared by thousands at once. Dialogue clips from old appearances were suddenly everywhere. In one, the tone was gentle, almost spiritual. In another, firm and unyielding. Fans placed these moments side by side, asking how both could coexist without explanation. Some defended the contrast passionately. People change, they said. Grief is not consistent. Trauma rewires the way someone speaks and reacts. But critics countered that public messaging carries weight, especially when legal processes and public pressure are involved. To them, the shifts felt less like evolution and more like strategy. The reactions of supporters added another layer of complexity. Die-hard fans flooded comment sections with messages of loyalty, insisting that questioning motives crossed a moral line. They spoke about empathy, about boundaries, about respecting pain. On the other side, skeptical viewers argued that empathy does not cancel accountability. They said asking questions does not mean celebrating harm. This back and forth grew increasingly personal, with strangers accusing each other of being heartless or gullible. Meanwhile, silence from certain figures became impossible to ignore. People who once spoke openly now avoided the topic entirely. Fans speculated endlessly about why. Some suggested legal advice, others suggested internal conflict. Silence became a canvas onto which anyone could project their own theory. Even creators who tried to remain neutral found themselves pulled into the speculation simply by acknowledging that it existed. Rumors about behind-the-scenes tensions began circulating, framed carefully as unverified chatter. Reports suggested disagreements within inner circles, stress over public image, and fear over how much scrutiny might grow if the story dragged on. Again, nothing was presented as fact, but repetition gave these ideas weight. When enough people repeat the same question, it starts to feel like a statement, even when it is not. Fans also began discussing timing more aggressively. Why now became a recurring refrain. Why did this footage surface at this exact moment? Why did conversations reignite just as attention seemed to be shifting elsewhere? Some argued it was coincidence, the randomness of the internet. Others believe timing is rarely accidental when so much is at stake. These debates played out in long comment threads, with no clear winner, only more questions. Personal stakes became a focal point. Viewers talked about how public narratives can affect private lives, how children grow up under these shadows, how families fracture under scrutiny. Some fans expressed concern that speculation itself could cause harm. Others argued that silence and avoidance cause harm too. The family was left divided in public perception, even if the reality behind closed doors remained unknown. Through all of this, content creators struggled with balance. They spoke directly to their audiences, reminding them that this was commentary, not confirmation. They emphasized words like alleged, reported, and speculated. Yet they also acknowledged the emotional reality of what people were seeing and feeling. Ignoring the conversation entirely felt impossible, because the conversation was everywhere. What kept people watching was not certainty, but tension. Unresolved tension has a gravity of its own. Each new clip, each new reaction video, each new thread promised the possibility of clarity, even if it rarely delivered it. Viewers tuned in not because they believed they would find answers, but because they didn't want to miss the moment when something finally made sense. By this point, the story had grown larger than the footage that sparked it. it became a reflection of how modern audiences engage with tragedy, authority, and trust. People weren't just watching events unfold, they were participating, shaping the narrative through their reactions. And once a story reaches that stage, it no longer belongs to any single person. It belongs to the crowd, with all the chaos and emotion that comes with it. By the time the discussion reached this stage, the emotional temperature had changed again. What once felt like curiosity now felt like exhaustion mixed with suspicion. Fans weren't just shocked anymore, they were tired of feeling confused, tired of feeling like every answer created two more questions. Emotions ran high, not in explosive arguments this time, but in a quieter, heavier way. People started saying things like they just wanted the truth, whatever that truth might be, even if it was uncomfortable. This is where the idea of narrative management began showing up more frequently in conversations. Viewers talked about how public stories are often shaped not only by what is said, but by what is emphasized, repeated, or rushed. Some fans pointed out how quickly certain statements gained traction, while others faded into the background. They questioned whether attention was being guided intentionally or simply swept along by algorithms and outrage. Again, nobody claimed to know for sure, but the suspicion lingered. Dialogues imagined behind closed doors became part of the drama. Fans speculated about tense conversations, disagreements over strategy, and emotional standoffs between advisors, family members, and supporters. People wrote comments imagining exchanges like, "We need this to end," or "We can't let this drag on," as if they could hear the pressure in the air. These imagined moments weren't treated as fact, but they added a sense of realism to the story, making it feel more alive, more human. Another major shift happened when fans started comparing this situation to other high-profile cases they had followed before. They talked about patterns they thought they recognized, sudden changes in tone, urgent legal language appearing after public forgiveness, stories narrowing instead of expanding. Some viewers said they had seen this movie before and didn't like how it usually ended. Others pushed back, saying comparisons are dangerous and unfair. Still, the parallels were enough to keep people talking. The emotional stakes felt higher because of who was watching. Supporters, critics, casual viewers, and even people who had tried to stay away were now paying attention. Reactions spilled beyond dedicated fan spaces into broader discussions. People who have no emotional investment began asking neutral questions, and sometimes those questions cut deeper than accusations ever could. A simple why can feel more threatening than an angry rant. Fans also started discussing power dynamics. Who benefits if the story moves quickly? Who benefits if it slows down? Who gains sympathy, and who risks losing credibility? These questions were framed carefully, often with disclaimers reminding readers that this was speculation, but repetition gave them weight. The idea that time itself could be a tool became a recurring theme, and once people start thinking in those terms, it's hard to unsee. Family dynamics became another emotional focal point. Viewers expressed sadness over how public scrutiny can fracture private bonds. They imagined relatives disagreeing over what to say, what to hide, and what to confront. Some fans empathized deeply with the pressure of representing a family while carrying personal grief. Others argued that leadership comes with responsibility, especially when public trust is involved. The family was left divided in perception once again, split between sympathy and skepticism. The role of fans themselves also came under scrutiny. People began questioning their own behavior. Were they helping uncover important questions, or were they contributing to noise and harm? Some admitted feeling uncomfortable with how invested they had become. Others defended their involvement, saying that public figures invite public discourse. This self-reflection added another layer to the story, turning the audience into part of the narrative. Creators responded to this shift by changing their tone. Videos became slower, more deliberate. Commentary leaned into analysis rather than reaction. Creators reminded viewers repeatedly that nothing was proven, that these were conversations happening online, not conclusions being drawn. Yet even with caution, the underlying tension remained. Every pause felt loaded. Every careful word felt intentional. Fans noticed how certain phrases were used over and over. Reports suggest, questions are being raised, viewers are noticing. These phrases became familiar, almost comforting in their neutrality, yet they also highlighted how much remained unresolved. Neutrality did not bring clarity, it simply allowed the conversation to continue without crossing lines. By this stage, the footage that started everything almost faded into the background. It was still there, still referenced, but it was no longer the main character. The main character had become doubt itself. Doubt about motives, doubt about timing, doubt about narratives that felt too neat for such a messy reality. What kept people engaged was not hope for a shocking revelation, but the sense that something important was being danced around. Fans felt like they were circling an answer that never quite came into view. And in that space between knowing and not knowing, imagination fills the gaps, sometimes responsibly, sometimes recklessly. This phase of the story did not end with a bang. It settled into a tense silence punctuated by occasional sparks. People watched closely, waiting for the next move, the next statement, the next shift in tone. They weren't sure what they expected anymore. They just knew that whatever came next would be watched, dissected, and remembered. As the story moved into this final stretch, the noise did not disappear, but it changed shape. The frantic energy softened into something more watchful, almost restrained. Fans were no longer racing to post first or shout the loudest. Instead, they watched closely, reading between lines, studying what was said and what was carefully avoided. Emotions still ran high, but they were tempered by a sense that this situation was bigger than any single clip or comment. Public statements during this phase felt measured, almost cautious. Words were chosen with care, pauses felt intentional, and every sentence seemed designed to say just enough without opening new doors. Fans noticed this immediately. Some praised the restraint, calling it maturity under pressure. Others felt it confirmed their suspicion that everything was being tightly managed. Once again, no facts were being proven, but interpretation filled the space where certainty was missing. Reactions from the wider audience grew more complex. Casual viewers who had only recently tuned in expressed confusion, asking for simple explanations that never quite arrived. Longtime followers tried to summarize the situation, but even they struggled to explain why it all felt so unsettled. The story resisted clean narratives. Every attempt to simplify it left something important out, and people sensed that. Dialogue imagined by fans became quieter, more introspective. Instead of dramatic confrontations, people pictured late-night conversations filled with exhaustion and worry. Phrases like "this has gone too far" or "we need this to stop" showed up in comments, framed as empathy rather than accusation. Viewers began to recognize the emotional toll these stories take, not just on those involved, but on everyone watching and reacting. Supporters continued to defend fiercely, but even among them, fatigue showed. Some asked others to step back to let time do its work. Critics too softened their tone, shifting from accusation to concern. They spoke about the importance of transparency, but also about the danger of endless speculation. For a brief moment, it felt like both sides were closer to understand each other, even if they still disagreed. The question of legacy started appearing in discussions. Fans talked about how stories like this linger long after headlines fade. They wondered how these moments would be remembered years from now. Would they be seen as necessary conversations or as examples of collective overreach? Nobody had answers, but the fact that people were asking showed how deeply the situation had embedded itself in public consciousness. Content creators responded by zooming out. Instead of focusing on individual moments, they discussed broader themes: grief in public, power in perception, how easily narratives harden before truth has time to breathe. They reminded audiences that watching does not equal knowing, and reacting does not equal understanding. These reflections slowed the pace of the conversation, encouraging viewers to think rather than rush to judgment. Still, unresolved questions refused to vanish. Timing continued to bother people. The contrast between different emotional tones continued to feel jarring. Even those who wanted to move on admitted that something about the sequence of events did not sit comfortably. Discomfort does not always mean wrongdoing, but it does mean the story is not finished in the minds of those watching. The family remained at the emotional center of all of this, whether they wanted that role or not.
Fans expressed hope that private healing could exist despite public pressure. They worried about how constant scrutiny affects relationships, especially when every action is interpreted through suspicion. The family was left divided in public perception once more, caught between sympathy and doubt, neither of which fully captured reality. As days passed without dramatic new developments, some viewers drifted away. Others stayed, checking back periodically, unwilling to fully let go. The story had become part of the background noise of online discourse, quieter but persistent. It no longer dominated feeds, but it lingered in memory, ready to resurface whenever triggered by a new comment or reminder. What became clear in this final phase was that the footage itself was never the point. It was a catalyst, a spark that reignited deeper conversations about trust, authority, and how stories are shaped. The real drama lived in the reactions, the interpretations, and the emotional investment of millions of strangers trying to make sense of something they could only see from the outside. By the time the conversation settled into this uneasy calm, most viewers understood one thing: certainty was not coming anytime soon. There would be no clean resolution, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, there was only the choice of how to engage with uncertainty. Some chose patience, some chose distance, some chose continued discussion. The story did not end with answers, it ended with awareness. Awareness of how quickly narratives form, how powerfully emotions spread, and how easily lines blur between observation and assumption. Whether the questions raised were fair or not, they existed now, woven into the story itself. And once questions take root in public consciousness, they rarely disappear completely, even when the noise fades. At this point, the story is far from settled. and that is exactly why so many people are still watching. What you have just heard is not a conclusion, not a verdict, and not a claim of facts. It is a reflection of the conversations, reactions, and reports circulating online right now. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the family was left divided in the court of public opinion, but the biggest questions remain unanswered. Now, it is your turn to decide how you feel about it. Do you think this footage is being misunderstood, or do you believe it raises questions that deserve more transparency? Do you see this as another example of internet speculation going too far, or as a reminder that public narratives are often more complicated than they appear on the surface? There is no right or wrong opinion here, only perspective. Stories like this show how powerful commentary can be, how quickly emotions spread, and how easily perception can shape reality. You are not being asked to take sides, but you are being invited to think critically, to listen carefully, and recognize the difference between confirmed facts and ongoing discussion. Sometimes the most important part of a story is not what we know, but what we are still questioning. If you want to stay updated on conversations like this, make sure you support the channel. Like the video if you found the breakdown engaging. Subscribe so you do not miss future commentary on trending stories and viral reports. And most importantly, drop your thoughts in the comments below. What stood out to you the most? Which part of the story made you pause? And where do you think this goes next? Your voice matters here. This channel exists to reflect what people are talking about, not to tell you what to think. So join the discussion, share your perspective, and let us know how you see this unfolding.